It is fantastic to see this house full. It's been 2 years since we've actually come together and do this. And one of the biggest joys of coming back to work has just been able to see colleagues day to day. We are equally delighted to welcome our virtual participants as well. Nowadays, it's like a TV production. You have to not only worry about the people who are here, but also folks who are streaming in online, and I've been told from over 20 countries already. We have a few announcements. Don't forget to grab your innovation passport. This is our way to gamify you attending the sessions. The more sessions you attend, the grand prize is an overnight stay at the farm. So if any of you are interested in that, and please download the mobile app for the Innovation Fair so you can participate in our polls and also send questions to us while we are having our chats. This fireside chat is a special edition of the Innovation Speaker Series, and this is brought to you by the ADB Innovation Hub. To quote David Letterman, our next guest needs no introduction. I'm sure 80%, if not 100% of us in this room either have a Netflix subscription or are sharing one from our friends and family. Don't worry, we won't tell them. Netflix is a global streaming giant with over 200 million subscribers in over 190 countries, streaming and producing content in over 60 languages. What started as a DVD mail-in service in 1998 is today a company whose market cap is worth over 100 billion and annual revenues of over $30 billion. To say the least, Netflix has revolutionized the industry. Now, many of you must be wondering, what does ADB have in common with Netflix? In January, Suzanne handed me the book No Rules Rules, written by Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix. And I must confess, I was expecting a behind-the-scenes gossip of shows like Squid Game and Bridgerton and all the other television juggernauts that we have seen. But it turned out instead to be a deep introspection on the company's innovation culture. How does it balance rules and processes and enable talent to grow? How does it remain client-centric with an eye always to the future to reinvent itself? I think many of you here, I can see nodding heads. You kind of see the connection with ADB now. Our culture transformation initiative, both as mentioned by Uchong as well as Tomo, requires us to be client-centric, trustworthy, and transformational. And our new organizational structure requires each and every one of us to be innovative, not only within our organization, but also with our clients together to innovate with them. Our speaker today, Marzena Rembowski, she's asked me to call her Maz, is the Director of Public Policy and the Global Head of Strategic Engagement at Netflix. Based out of Singapore, she's worked for over 5 years in the organization and leads campaigns around the world to support competitive, open, and dynamic media digital ecosystem. Before I invite you on stage, I've been asked that Netflix has shared a video with us that they'd like to stream right now. Can I invite you on stage? Oops, careful. All right. The microphone. So, Thank you, everyone. Now, if that doesn't get you down to the auditorium, oh, is the mic working? Can you just check? If that doesn't get you down to the auditorium, I don't know what else will. Mazena, let's get the burning question out of the way. Do Netflix employees watch Netflix in their free time, or does it remind you too much of work?
No, I watch it. Is this working?
Okay. I think there you go. Try this one. I think the lapel's working.
Yes, I mean, when I see the short video we've just shown you, I get as excited as I did before I joined and still now. So when I travel or anytime, I always have the opportunity of enjoying our shows.
So what are you watching?
I'm just going to start at the moment the Empress that we have. So very excited to start on that. And I am kind of few episodes into Attorney Wu as well that we've recently released.
Thank you. I was actually curious when I was reading about your profile, and the first thing that jumped at me was, what does a director of policy do at Netflix? Tell us a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like and the time in Netflix.
Sure. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank you for having me here today. I think it's, I was very interested in the opening remarks and you have a beautiful space as well. So I can see why everyone wants to be there in person. So thank you for having me. The work that Netflix does, it's about telling stories. And behind this, to the point of today's conversation, is a lot of innovation. And as part of that, I think it's important for our organization to engage with governments, organizations such as the ADB, to really explain what we do and how we should look to the future and how we want to continue engaging in the creative sector and building a creative economy. So part of my work and my team and the broader policy team as Netflix is that continued engagement. And it's really varied. It can be engaging, talking about how we build stories, how we empower people to tell stories locally for these stories to travel. So it can be around production, it can be creative economy, but it's also about how we innovate rulemaking and how we innovate approach to regulations and understanding we have the tools. So my team focuses a lot on measuring impact, and I know the ADB does a lot of this as well, measuring impact, looking at data to really understand the countries that we are a part of.
Yeah, thank you. I already mentioned a little bit about commonalities. Where do you see commonalities with ADB?
I mean, after hearing the remarks this morning, I see plenty. It really resonated with me. Some of the mentions that you said. People, I think, is critical. The ADB is a very large organization, but I think what is the most valuable about it is the people. And at Netflix, we often say that we value people over process, and that's something that's really something that we live in our everyday culture. And I think as commonalities, I think that would be the first one. I think a second one that was mentioned is innovation is a multitude of small things. They're not always large gestures. I think it's an approach, and I really enjoyed what you said earlier on. Instead of saying the problem is, we have people within Netflix who come up with ideas, who fail at those ideas, and who come up with new ideas, and kind of always constantly drive to be better in what we do and to learn every day. And I think that's what I see in commonalities as well.
I've been asked to remind colleagues, please send in your questions using the mobile app so that we can take some, and we'll ask some of that to Marzena as well. But one of the things that we've kind of struggling with and maybe trying to even understand and grapple is maybe it's a misconception that as organizations grow, you need more rules and processes to actually guide them and to make sure that you're achieving the objective that you set out to. Netflix's journey has been a little bit different, and from reading no rules, it kind of seems the opposite. But I think where Tomo and other colleagues were mentioning was striking that balance. How do you see it in Netflix? So how do you balance rules?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it's a great challenge, especially with organizations such as the ADB. I think the most important is to enable a learning culture. And I think for us at Netflix, that's what Reed has done brilliantly, is to really enable that we learn every day. Our culture evolves, and that was mentioned as well in the opening remarks, is having this ability to evolve, renew. And I think that's the aspect about learning, that it's a kind of continuing culture that we have and approach to our work. So I think that for me is that learning aspect is the most important.
So speaking of learning, so how do you enable talent? Because you said it's all about people, right? And in ADB as well, in our culture, and I see Suzanne nodding along right there, it's all about people. It's all about making sure that we attract the right talent, retain the right talent, right? So what is your formula?
Yes, I think for, I don't know who will have read the book or know some of the...
Maybe a show of hands. Who's read the book? Oh, or we get one big one from Suzanne. Oh, there you go. You have a few people.
I think one part is trust in the people. And something that struck me personally when I joined, compared to previous places where I have worked, and I have worked in a political environment, I have worked in legal environment, and so public and private sector, is that in our organization, and I hope I do that with my team, is they don't have to justify why they are here. The fact that they are where they are is in itself the proof that they are excellent colleagues. And I think that trust in our people, that they will bring their best for this organization to tell the stories that we want to tell locally, globally. I think that is the most important. So it does sound cliche sometimes to say it's about people, but it's about also giving the environment to people that they know they can bring their best self to work. I think is quite critical. Some of you might have heard or have seen that in Netflix you often hear about some of our values and ensuring that we have highly performance approach. And I think it is true in our organization, and this is something that works for us. I think the challenge is every organization has to find its innovative ways. And as you said, the commonality is here being people. Process is a challenge, I think. And we cannot pretend there's never any processes. I think Netflix has done incredibly well in that respect of not having process hinder innovation and not having process hinder approach. And what's critical to that, beyond people, is a culture of feedback. And I think that is, in combination with trust, is what we often talk internally about candor. So it's really being honest with one another and providing feedback. And I have been at Netflix 5 years and have experienced it in many ways. It's not about being negative or critic. It's about being constructive on, hey, this is going great. How can we do this better? This has not gone great. What could we do better next time? We often do, lesson learn. How this was great, but how could it be even better? And I think that culture of feedback becomes really integrated in our everyday work. So it is part of what was discussed earlier about the small things, is ensuring that that is part of the small things.
Mazhar, can I, not to put you on the spot, but can you give us an example of when feedback was given and it was a bit startling to you, or you're not used to that?
I can, there's probably a lot that I can provide as examples, but I'll give a recent one. So my manager, Dean, kind of came to me and he said, talking of team, you need to make sure to give them room to grow. And your instinct often is to say, but I have, or, well, the problem is. And I think my learning on this is kind of saying, okay, I thought I did, but how can I do this better? And in that way, I turned to my team and I was like, okay, what do you need? And instead of putting people on the spot, you just say, what do you need? How can I help you? And that's kind of something that I have to do every day. And if I make sure that my team has what they need, I think then what matters is the long-term goal. I think it's important. I think also what's important is, talking of people and processes, we have a very clear vision. And having engaged with some of you at the ADB, I'm amazed by the vision that the ADB has and the extraordinary work that is being done here. And I think you have that in spades. And I think having that vision, what we have as Netflix, our vision is about bringing local stories to the world, enabling storytellers from all parts of the world to tell their stories and see yourself on screen. And I think what matters when I speak to my team, and my team is a policy team, you know, we're not the ones creating the content, is that's our goal. So the projects that you do, that you lead, what I care about is how we get there. And how you get there, that's for you to decide. And as a leader, that's not for me to kind of start digging in. You do it in the best way you see fit. And so again, it's about trust, feedback, and candor, and I think empowering our colleagues as well.
You've touched upon so many important things, but I'll just try to just make a little pivot. What do you think motivates the average Netflix employee? Because, you know, many times when you're just bogged down with just doing the mundaneness of our task, like, you know, maybe just looking at, you know, printouts for this event, or, you know, what goes on the screen, you forget what we've really done here, right? You forget the big picture. So how do you remind that for Netflix
I think you
employees?
just saw it in the short video we showed. You know, like, when I see these videos about our content and the stories we tell, I'm so excited, you know, and I'm very proud to be a part of that. And that's what I'm saying. I think the ADB has such an impact in the region, beyond the region. And for me, what drives me, and I'll speak about my own experience, is seeing the power of storytelling. And I think we, as Netflix, I see the impact that we have in the creative economy. And what's really important is how can we nurture and how can we empower people to tell these stories. And that's what gets me excited. And there will always be mundane things probably in any kind of organization, but I think is having a common goal. And for me, the fact that we continue to have amazing stories, that we continue, when I see successes, you know, we often hear Norwegian Squid Game, I see Atuni Wu, how that resonates across culture is incredible. And we see it. We have so many of our stories that travel, you know, stories made in India, Sacred Games that will travel to Brazil or travel to Canada. You have Lupin made in France that is very popular as well in this region. And that power of storytelling is genuinely what I see as excellence that Netflix brings.
Not to shamelessly plug our own event at this time, but we've got the TED Talks in the evening, which is all about the power of storytelling. So you should see that we are trying to make sure that this amazing work that ADB is doing comes out as well. And it reminds us that it's about the people that we are working for, not necessarily the process that we are trying to follow. Should we talk a little bit about what is orange economy?
Yeah, I mean, on this one, I think I should ask you. I think you're much better placed to it. I think from our perspective, it's the creative economy. And that's what I'm saying. It's a small part to what the ADB does. The creative economy is something that has always existed, but is not necessarily recognized as such often. And I think where my team and where we are trying to see is how we measure the impact of such a creative economy. You will often hear when you talk about innovation about technology. And then on the other part, you often hear about entertainment. And I think when Netflix has really put that bridge is for these stories to be told by people behind the creative economy, you have innovation, you have technology, but you have stories. And I think what's extraordinary is what we forget is behind every show that you have seen mentioned, for example, in that short video, you have people in pre-production, post-production. You have a huge amount of people behind the camera, in front of the camera. It's a variety of skills. It's very, very broad in the impact. And I think particularly I see in Asia Pacific, I see it in India, I see it in Korea. And now I'm based in Singapore and I have the opportunity to travel a lot more across the region. It's truly recognizing the strength of that part of the economy. And to do that, I think what we are missing a lot is an approach to data, ensuring that we measure the impact of the creative economy and how that creative economy is actually a force for the broader economy as well within the region. And especially we often talk, for example, I'll give an example. I want to say post-COVID, and it's still COVID today, but where we're at today, we have talked a lot about recovery. I know the bank this is something that's been very important. And as Netflix, we have had, COVID hit and a lot of our production obviously stopped, and we had to be innovative as well in our approach. And we have really tried to see how we can participate in that recovery. And one part, and where we engage a lot as well with governments and organization, is showing the impact of that sector. And it needs to be recognized, the creative economy, as a sector in the way that other parts of economy should be. And the example I want to show is we talk about the impact on tourism and cultural affinity. And one part of it, I think, is when you have a show such as Sacred Game or Squid Game, it is important to measure the impact of that being seen all across. And you have people, as I mentioned, in Brazil, in Canada, in Spain, who will travel, who will say, wait, I want to experience this. They will see cooking shows. They will see, we have so many, and they will say, I want to experience this. I want to learn the language. I want to learn the culture. This is amazing, and I want to do that. And instead of looking at the creative economy and saying, sure, it's entertainment, there's actually a lot more in terms of the ripple effect behind that. And that is shown. And I think tourism is just a small example of how actually it does impact as a secondary and third part to the economy broadly.
Can I ask, so what was Netflix's biggest learning from the COVID phase? Like when you were, especially when you're working with creative economy?
A great question. And I'm not going to speak for everyone at Netflix.
But maybe just for yourself.
From my perspective. I think is we have recognized, I think, our ability, as was mentioned again as well this morning, in time of challenges to rise. And again, if you enable a culture where it's people over process and innovation, it has pushed us to be even more innovative. And I think for us, a learning is bringing technology, bringing innovation allows us to oversee some of the challenges that we have seen with COVID and otherwise. So I think maybe is a continued investment in production innovation. We often talk about it, but you'll see it, VFX or, anything around visual effects. And that area is something that's a big learning to continue.
I think the takeaway for me is that it's not just what you see in front of the camera, but there's so many jobs and sectors associated behind the camera. I read in the report that you recently launched with ADB, the number of billions of the contribution to the economy as well as the number of jobs. Can you tell us a little bit about that partnership with ADB?
Sure, and I'm actually shamelessly going to pick on my colleague Sergio, who's with me, who led that initiative actually with the ADB in Latin America. And actually it was about trying to understand what I said is measuring the impact of that economy. So I think we kind of together looked at how do we do that? Let's look at the production landscape. Let's see what it really talks to us in terms of number over time. And then from that analysis, we were able to draw lessons on how as Netflix, but also for governments and for ADB, where should we focus our resources? Where should we focus growth? Where should we look at a wider regulatory process? And I think one big learning from the work we have done with the ADB in in Latin America, I would say specifically, is it is important to put resources in enabling and building, I'm going to say, parts of that sector. And in that way, I think it's something that has continued, and it's engaging in training programs, it's upskilling that's really critical. And that if we put our resources in this, we will see it twofold or threefold going forward. And I think it's thanks to that research that we're able to understand that better.
So how do you see the ADB Innovation Hub and Netflix collaborating, or larger ADB?
Yeah, I think as Netflix, I think we have a huge amount to learn from what the ADB is doing, and I think we're just starting. And I thank you for Junie as well for the engagement that we've had in just learning of what is important for you as innovation, as the hub, and where you want to focus. So I think for that, in that way, it's a start. And I think I'm just really excited at, and personally having relocated to Singapore, on learning really what the region brings, and how we can work together better to empower actually really the creative sector.
Yeah, I can see so much commonalities, especially from what you have spoken. I'll just ask colleagues if you have any questions for Maz to just come up to the stage. Due to COVID, we have to have a standing mic, and I've been getting some questions as well. Thank you. But it would be nice, because we're all here, rather than just sending us questions to the post-it, which I'll also address, if someone could grab the mic and ask a question. All right, Maz. It takes a little while to warm up.
We have a culture of feedback, so, please,
yeah.
step in and ask anything.
All right. So I don't think there's a question about sharing lessons, right? So sharing lessons and balancing innovation and risk-taking. Risk-taking. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that you're innovative and balancing and managing the risks of every project?
It's an everyday challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's be very honest. I think it's an everyday challenge. I think culturally, and that's also in the book, and you hear that a lot, is giving space for people to take risks. We often talk internally about, this is a bet, and we measure it. We measure, so it's not as if we're coming up with an idea, 5 people in a room, and then we just go ahead. It's really like, do you know what? Let's take a bet. Let's take a measured risk, or let's take a risk, and put our energy and effort in making it happen. And I'll be honest, in my time, having been in Netflix, it has always been fantastic learning in all ways, when it has worked, when it has been impactful. And I think there's a lot of lessons that can be done. You see it in the way we have evolved our service, in the way we've evolved the product, and in the way that we tell the story. So I think for me is giving space for risks to be taken.
It's interesting. In our team, we say, let's not worry about failure, but let's make sure that we've done everything in our power to not fail, right? But if despite that we fail, it's all right. Okay? So that's kind of a good. And I think we have our first live question. Iram, just introduce yourself so that our audience online also understands.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Iram Essen. I'm a lawyer by profession and currently working with the accountability part of the bank, which is not very pleasant, but it exists for a reason. So my question to you, since you come from the policy side of Netflix, and this is something we struggle in a multilateral development setting, is the confidentiality of the stories or behind those stories. So when you share something, or when you talk about other people's story, there are so many things that you can and you cannot tell. So with a big giant like Netflix, how do you deal with that confidentiality and disclaimers and all of that? I know it's a boring question, but it really
it's not at all. It's
Thank
not
you.
at all. I think it's a great question, and not to plug Reed's book, but he does address it in the book. It's a big part of it. So at Netflix, we really have a transparency culture, and I came, as I said, before I joined Netflix, I worked in a law firm. I worked in the European Parliament for a member. Very different culture. And I arrived at Netflix, and what was really scary is the access to information. I was like, wow, I can see everything. You know, you wouldn't have these kind of confidential memos or blocked to access. It allowed two things. Speed. We are able to be very fast in making decisions and driving initiatives because everyone is on the same page. You don't have to constantly update people and, oh, well, you haven't seen that memo, but I have access to it, so let me tell you about it. No, we all need to know the same things and we're on the same page. So I think that culture of transparency for me has been my biggest, I would say my top 3 of the best things that I have encountered at Netflix. So the confidentiality, having worked in a law firm, I know that sometimes you can't escape it. And, you know, we have multitude of lawyers and they deal with contracts and others. So I think that culture, and I think it's trust in our colleagues. We are also a large organization, not the size of the ADB, and we trust that people keep that information confidential. So I think to a certain extent is try and see what happens.
Was there a lot of litigation along the way? Just
Sorry?
curious. Was there a lot of litigation along the way, or
what
just
kind
curious?
What kind? Sorry.
Somebody breaching, Netflix breaching somebody's confidentiality.
So again, if you were to read the book, Reed would say the rare instances was worth the risk. Is worth actually the initiative. So there's one small anecdote I can share. We have, whether it's on travel or expenses, we have a very different culture. And you might have the odd person that might, to a certain extent, maybe abuse that trust or abuse the openness, but it's one among thousands or hundreds. So Reed would tell you that's a risk. And he took that bet early on. And for that, I have to say we are very grateful to be in that way. It's a big challenge. It's a very and an organization like ADB has to find its own way. So I'm just saying what has worked for us is really to be able as much as possible to have that transparency.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aram. And that's a great point also to deal with the exception, right? And let's just take that rare instance and just focus on that and not just try to make a general rule that bars everyone from kind of sharing that information. I have one more question. Ajit, why don't we take you? And then I've got one question from online. And then we can wrap up. Oh, sorry, is there another? I'm sorry, I didn't see who's first. Oh, all right, you go ahead. Please introduce yourself for online.
Thanks. Yeah, I sat down. Yeah, okay, so my name's Andre. I work as an advisor to board directors. And just sort of in terms of, to make it concrete, because I think there are ideals and platitudes for, for the cynics. And how do you move then from those ideals to concrete steps? I think remote working will be one. If you're saying we're moving to X number of days a week remote, I mean, that's a concrete way of moving, saying we trust people, etc. So how do you move to the concrete things from those ideals? Another example would be to say, in meetings, if you want ideas, you let junior people speak first. Just kind of like instituting those structural things to kind of be, facilitate or have a conducive environment for innovation and sharing. So how do you do that, and what are examples from organizations, other ones, and also, of course, Netflix?
Yes, thanks for the question. I can give you a lot of examples for Netflix. What I don't want to do is say that what we do at Netflix should work at the ADB. I definitely, that's not my place. And importantly, every organization has to find its own way. One thing I will say, and I feel like I'm really plugging Reed's book here, but
this is not a book tour.
I know.
Yeah, just want to.
It's genuinely for us of no rules. So the example you have just mentioned, should we establish a rule that it's X number of days a week? We don't have that. Should we have a rule that junior people should speak first? It's tough if you're junior to be put on the spot. So do they want that? But so instead of actually adding rules and processes, it's enabling an environment where, and I know it might sound like a platitude, but it is genuinely, for us, it's enabling an environment that means that everyone feels that they are equal and can speak up. And I think on this, it's also the responsibility of leaders to do that. We learn every day in terms of inclusion as well at Netflix, and we talk a lot about inclusion and diversity and ensuring, say, to the example you gave, junior people feel they can speak up. And and we are very open on this is a continued learning and we need to be better. But I personally, I don't think that creating rules will help achieve that. So in itself, I would say you create rules, there's always going to be exception, people not going to fit. It all doesn't fit in a box. So I would say having a different approach to it, and having maybe what sounds like platitudes is helpful. And it has worked for us. And as I said, the ADB has its own way in finding what works as well.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. We're running out of time, but the team from Netflix is here all day, and they're also participating in the innovation marketplace. So any questions that you have for Maz and Sergio, they'll be happy to answer. Maz, once again, just thank you very much for coming and sharing these incredibly
Thank you
insightful
for having
stories.
us.
We're looking forward to our collaboration. Thank you, and a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.